$5,000. That is the number now flashing across every trading terminal on the planet, and it is not a forecast. It is not a projection from some fringe newsletter. It is the actual price of one single ounce of gold as of this month. Let me put that into perspective for you. Just 5 years ago, gold was trading near $1,800. It has nearly tripled, and the acceleration is not slowing down, it is speeding up. But here is where this story turns from a headline into a loaded weapon aimed directly at your bank account. JPMorgan Chase, the largest and most powerful bank in the United States, a bank that manages nearly $4 trillion in assets, has just released an internal projection stating that gold is heading to $7,300 per ounce. That is not a decade-long prediction. That is their near-term target. And when the institution that literally serves as the beating heart of the American financial system tells you that the metal priced against the dollar is about to surge another 46%, what they are really telling you is that the dollar itself is dying. This has officially moved from theory to reality. The world's reserve currency, the instrument in which your savings account is denominated, your mortgage is priced, your retirement is calculated, and your paycheck is measured, is losing a war it cannot win. If you thought the inflation of 2022 and 2023 was painful, if you thought watching your grocery bill climb 30% was the worst it could get, you are not ready for what comes next. Because $5,000 gold is not the crisis. $5,000 gold is the smoke alarm telling you the house is already on fire. And $7,300 gold is JP Morgan telling you they do not expect anyone to put the flames out. Before we go any further, I need you to do two things. First, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because the information in this video could fundamentally change how you protect your family's wealth over the next 24 months. Second, drop a comment right now, just one word: dollar or gold. Tell me which one you trust more to hold your purchasing power over the next 5 years. Let us see where this audience stands, because by the end of this video, I promise you, your answer may change. To understand the magnitude of this threat, we have to look at a number that almost nobody in mainstream financial media is willing to show you. The headline number you see on television is the national debt, currently standing above $36 trillion. That figure alone is staggering, but it is a carefully curated figure designed to make the situation look manageable. The real number, the one that includes unfunded liabilities like Social Security obligations, Medicare promises, federal pension commitments, and state-level debt, is north of $200 trillion. Most analysts ignore this because acknowledging it would force them to admit that the United States government is not just in debt, it is mathematically insolvent. There is no combination of tax increases and spending cuts that closes a $200 trillion gap. None. The calculator breaks, and that gap is precisely what gold is now pricing in. Let me give you the brief history that makes this moment so devastating. In 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and gold. Before that, every dollar in circulation was theoretically backed by a physical quantity of gold sitting in a vault. After 1971, the dollar became what economists call a fiat currency, meaning its value rests entirely on trust, on the belief that the United States government will manage its finances responsibly. To replace the gold backing, the United States struck what many have called the greatest financial arrangement in modern history, the petrodollar system. In exchange for American military protection, Saudi Arabia and OPEC nations agreed to price all global oil sales exclusively in US dollars. This meant every country on Earth needed to hold massive reserves of dollars just to buy energy. That demand for dollars allowed the United States to print money, run deficits, and fund wars without ever facing the consequences that would destroy any other nation's currency. It was a symbiotic relationship that powered the global economy for over 5 decades. America got unlimited borrowing power, the Gulf states got military security, and the rest of the world got relative stability. But as of this year, that arrangement is officially dead. Saudi Arabia is selling oil in Chinese yuan. Russia has not accepted dollars in years. Over 40 nations in the BRICS alliance are actively building payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. The trade war of 2025 and 2026 has permanently broken this cycle. The nation that once held a monopoly on global monetary demand is now watching that monopoly dissolve in real time, and the proof is sitting right there in the price of gold. When gold rockets from $1,800 to $5,000 in 5 years, it is not telling you that gold got more valuable. It is telling you that the unit of measurement, the dollar, is collapsing. Now let me walk you through the chain reaction that is unfolding right now, because this is not a single crisis. This is a cascade, and each falling domino is hitting the next one harder. The primary crisis is the destruction of dollar confidence. When foreign central banks watch the United States weaponize its currency through sanctions, freeze sovereign reserves as it did to Russia in 2022, and print trillions of dollars to cover its own deficits, they make a rational decision. They diversify away from the dollar. In 2024 alone, global central banks purchased over 1,100 metric tons of gold. China's central bank has been buying gold for 18 consecutive months. This is not speculation. This is a fortress strategy. They know that holding U.S. Treasury bonds means holding a promise from a government that is $36 trillion in debt and adding $2 trillion more every single year. So they are exchanging paper promises for physical metal. This is why the price of gold is not rising because of jewelry demand or retail investors. It is rising because sovereign nations are conducting an orderly retreat from the dollar system, and they are doing it at a pace we have never seen in modern financial history. But here's where the second crisis triggers. As foreign central banks sell U.S. Treasury bonds to fund their gold purchases, the supply of treasuries on the open market increases. More supply means lower prices, and in the bond world, lower prices mean higher yields, which is another way of saying higher interest rates. The U.S. 10-year Treasury yield has been climbing relentlessly precisely because of this dynamic. This is why your mortgage rate is not coming down. This is why car loans are still brutally expensive. This is why credit card interest rates are sitting near record highs above 22%. You are paying this premium every single month, whether you realize it or not. And it is a direct consequence of the world losing faith in the dollar. The Federal Reserve does not control long-term interest rates. The bond market does. And the bond market is now being driven by foreign sellers who are dumping treasuries and buying gold instead. Now, the third crisis stacks on top. Higher interest rates mean the U.S. government itself has to pay more to service its existing debt. The federal government is now spending over $1.2 trillion per year just on interest payments. Let that sink in. That is more than the entire defense budget. That is more than Medicare. Interest on the debt is now the single largest line item in the federal budget. And here is the doom loop that makes this inescapable. As rates rise, interest costs rise. As interest costs rise, the deficit grows. As the deficit grows, the Treasury has to issue more bonds. As more bonds hit the market, yields rise further, which means interest costs rise again. Crisis A causes crisis B, which causes crisis C, which drives crisis A even higher. It is a negative feedback spiral with no exit. They know this inside the Treasury Department. They know this at the Federal Reserve. And they know the only historical escape from this kind of debt spiral is to inflate the currency, to make the debt smaller by making the dollars it is denominated in worth less. This is exactly what happened during the fall of the Roman Empire when emperors debased their silver coins by mixing in base metals until the currency became worthless. But now it is happening at a system-wide level, and it is happening to the currency that underpins the entire global financial architecture. The fourth crisis is the squeeze on the American consumer. As the dollar loses purchasing power, import prices rise. The United States imports roughly $3.8 trillion worth of goods annually. Everything from electronics to clothing to food ingredients to pharmaceuticals comes from overseas. When the dollar weakens, American importers have to pay more for those goods, and they pass that cost directly to you. This is why grocery prices have not returned to 2019 levels and never will. This is why a used car costs what a new car cost just 6 years ago. This is why your health insurance premium keeps climbing even when you do not use the system. The inflation you feel is not a temporary disruption. It is the structural consequence of a weakening currency, and gold at $5,000 is the market's thermometer confirming the fever is getting worse. Every dollar in your savings account is losing purchasing power faster than the interest rate your bank is paying you. If your savings account earns 4% but real inflation, not the manipulated government CPI number but actual lived inflation, is running at 8 to 10%, you're losing 4 to 6% of your wealth every single year. Over a decade, that compounds into a catastrophic erosion. This means your retirement fund, even if the stock market holds up, is buying you less and less with each passing year. The fifth crisis is geopolitical, and it is accelerating with terrifying speed. The BRICS nations, which now include Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, the UAE, and a growing list of applicants, collectively represent over 40% of the global population and a rapidly growing share of global GDP. They are building alternative payment systems, they are settling bilateral trade in local currencies, they are stockpiling gold at unprecedented rates. Russia and China alone have added over 3,000 metric tons of gold to their official reserves in the last decade, and those are just the reported numbers. What they are not showing you is the gold being acquired through off-market channels, through sovereign wealth funds, through state-owned mining operations that never report to the IMF. The real figures are likely 30 to 50% higher. They know that the next phase of global economic warfare will be fought not with missiles, but with currencies, and gold is the ultimate ammunition. It cannot be frozen by sanctions. It cannot be printed by a central bank. It cannot be devalued by a politician. This is why China has told its citizens to buy gold. This is why Russia has pegged part of its financial strategy to gold reserves. This is why central banks in Poland, India, and Turkey have been on a buying spree that dwarfs anything we have seen since the Bretton Woods era. The sixth crisis is the bond market itself, and many veteran traders are calling this the most dangerous battlefield in global finance right now. The U.S. bond market is valued at roughly $56 trillion. It is the largest securities market on Earth, and it is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Mortgage rates, corporate borrowing costs, municipal budgets, pension fund solvency, all of it rests on the stability of the Treasury market. But that market is showing cracks that look eerily similar to the fractures that preceded the 2008 financial crisis. In 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed because it held long-dated Treasury bonds that lost massive value as interest rates rose. SVB was not an outlier. It was the canary in the coal mine. Hundreds of regional banks across America are sitting on similar unrealized losses. The FDIC has acknowledged that unrealized losses across the U.S. banking system exceed $500 billion. These are not hypothetical numbers. These are real losses hiding on balance sheets because accounting rules allow banks to pretend the bonds are still worth what they paid for them, as long as they do not sell. But if a liquidity crisis forces sales, the losses become real overnight. This is exactly what happened during the 2008 crisis when mortgage-backed securities that were rated AAA turned out to be worthless. But now it is happening at a system-wide level with the very instrument the world considers the safest asset on Earth: the U.S. Treasury bond. The seventh crisis is the Achilles heel of the entire financial system, and that is the derivatives market. Sitting on top of the bond market, the stock market, and the currency market is an inverted pyramid of derivatives contracts valued at an estimated $650 trillion in notional value. These are complex financial instruments, essentially bets on bets on bets, and they are all connected through a web of counterparty risk that no single regulator fully understands. When interest rates move violently, when currencies swing unpredictably, when bond prices lurch downward, the margin calls on these derivatives can cascade through the system like a shockwave. In September 2022, the United Kingdom experienced a miniature version of this when its pension funds, which had used derivatives to hedge their bond exposure, nearly collapsed in a matter of days and forced the Bank of England into emergency intervention. The British pound fell to an all-time low. That was a warning shot across the bow of every developed economy, and the United States is not immune. The scale of the U.S. derivatives market makes the UK episode look like a skirmish compared to a full-scale war. The eighth crisis is the binary trap that the Federal Reserve now finds itself in, and both exits lead to destruction. Option 1. The Fed raises rates or keeps them elevated to defend the dollar and fight inflation. This crushes the housing market, bankrupts over-leveraged corporations, triggers a wave of defaults, and sends unemployment soaring. Option 2, the Fed cuts rates aggressively and restarts money printing to prevent a recession and keep the government able to service its debt. This destroys the dollar's remaining purchasing power, sends gold to JPMorgan's $7,300 target or higher, and ignites a new wave of inflation that devastates the middle class. Either suffer a deflationary depression or face an inflationary currency collapse. There is no soft landing. Both options lead to the destruction of your purchasing power, and the only difference is the speed at which it happens. They know this at the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell knows this. Every governor on the Federal Open Market Committee knows this. And this is why gold is at $5,000, because the market has already priced in the reality that there is no good outcome from this position. The ninth crisis is what is happening to the petrodollar in real time. Saudi Arabia's decision to accept yuan for oil sales was not a symbolic gesture. It was a strategic realignment of historic proportions. For decades, every barrel of oil sold anywhere in the world required the buyer to first acquire US dollars. This created a permanent, structural demand for the dollar that allowed America to run trade deficits that would have destroyed any other currency. Now that structural demand is evaporating, over 60% of China's oil imports from Russia are settled in yuan. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. The UAE is exploring digital currency settlements. Each of these transactions is a small puncture wound in the dollar's armor, and collectively they represent a siege on the reserve currency status that has been America's greatest economic weapon for half a century. This is coming directly out of your paycheck, because as global dollar demand falls, the currency weakens, and every imported good you buy becomes more expensive. You are living through the early stages of a reserve currency transition, and history tells us these transitions are never peaceful and never gradual. When the British pound lost its reserve currency status after World War II, British citizens experienced decades of economic decline, rationing, and diminished living standards. The transition away from the dollar will follow a similar pattern, but because the dollar is more deeply embedded in global finance than the pound ever was, the unraveling will be far more violent. The 10th and final crisis layer is the most personal one of all, and it is the crisis of your own net worth. Most Americans believe they are wealthier than they actually are because they are measuring their wealth in a unit that is shrinking. Your home may be worth more dollars than you paid for it, but priced in gold, priced in real purchasing power, it may have actually lost value. Your 401k may show a higher number on the statement, but if that number buys fewer groceries, fewer gallons of gas, fewer months of rent, then you have not gained wealth. You have gained digits on a screen while the substance behind those digits has been hollowed out. This is the cruelest illusion of a dying currency. It makes you feel richer while making you poorer. It is a pincer movement executed against the middle class, squeezed from one side by asset price inflation that benefits the ultra-wealthy and from the other side by consumer price inflation that devours the working family's budget. And this is precisely what gold at $5,000 is screaming at you. It is not a commodity story. It is a currency story. It is the story of the dollar's obituary being written in real time by every central bank, every sovereign wealth fund, and every billionaire who is quietly converting paper wealth into hard assets. Now let me shift from what is happening to what the smart money is doing about it. Because while most people are frozen in denial, the most powerful players on earth are moving with speed, precision, and conviction. China has accumulated more gold in the last 3 years than in the previous 2 decades combined. Their officially reported reserves are over 2,300 tons, but analysts who track Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawals and domestic mine production believe the true figure could be double that. China is not doing this because they think gold is a nice investment. They are doing this because they are preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer dominant, and they want their currency to have credibility when that moment arrives. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates and the manager of the largest hedge fund in history, has been publicly stating that the world is in the late stages of a long-term debt cycle and that cash and bonds are the most dangerous assets to hold. He has been explicit in his recommendation that gold and real assets provide the kind of protection that paper instruments cannot. Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the greatest investors of all time with a track record that includes never having a single losing year during his hedge fund career, has publicly discussed significant gold positions. These are not gold bugs operating out of a basement. These are the most sophisticated financial minds on earth, and they are telling you in plain language that the system you trust with your savings is fundamentally broken. Sovereign wealth funds from Singapore, Norway, the Middle East, and Asia are all increasing allocations to physical commodities and real assets, while reducing exposure to dollar-denominated bonds. When Norway's government pension fund, which manages over $1.7 trillion, begins shifting its allocation strategy, that is not a rumor or a conspiracy theory. That is a signal flare. Now, here is the distinction that could make or break your financial future over the next decade. There is a profound difference between paper wealth and real wealth. Paper wealth is a number in a brokerage account, a balance in a bank, a statement from a pension fund. It represents a claim, a promise, an IOU from an institution. Real wealth is ownership of something tangible, something that does not require a counterparty to honor a commitment. When you own shares of a stock in a brokerage account, you do not technically own a piece of a company. You own a claim registered in the name of a custodian, usually a clearinghouse like the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, and that custodian holds it on your behalf. If the system functions normally, this distinction is irrelevant. But in a crisis, when counterparties fail, when brokerages restrict trading as we saw during the GameStop saga, when governments impose capital controls, the difference between owning something and owning a claim on something becomes the difference between survival and catastrophe. This is where the conversation about financial repression becomes critical and urgent. Central bank digital currencies, known as CBDCs, are being developed or piloted by over 130 countries, representing 98% of global GDP. A CBDC gives a central bank direct control over every unit of currency in circulation. They can program it to expire, to be restricted from certain purchases, to carry negative interest rates that automatically deduct value from your balance. This is not science fiction. The European Central Bank has openly discussed the possibility of programmable features in a digital euro. China's digital yuan is already in active use across major cities. Once a CBDC is implemented, your ability to move your wealth freely, to save in the manner you choose, to transact privately, could be curtailed at the push of a button. Capital controls, which are restrictions on moving money across borders, have been implemented repeatedly throughout history. Cyprus did it in 2013, freezing bank accounts and seizing deposits above 100,000 euros. Greece did it in 2015, limiting ATM withdrawals to 60 euros per day. These are not emerging market problems. These happened in Europe, in modern developed economies, within the last decade. The window of opportunity to position yourself is still open today, but this window will not remain open forever as the crisis accelerates. When gold was at $2,000, people said it was too expensive. When it hit $3,000, they said they would wait for a pullback. Now it is at $5,000, and JPMorgan is projecting $7,300. At every stage, the people who waited lost purchasing power relative to those who acted. The categories of assets that have historically survived. Currency crises and debt crises are well documented. Physical precious metals held outside the banking system. Productive agricultural land that generates real output regardless of what currency it is priced in. Energy assets that the world physically cannot function without. Essential commodities that form the backbone of civilization. Equities in companies that produce real things the world needs, not speculative technology promises, but hard, tangible output. Real estate in jurisdictions with strong property rights and stable governance. These are not exotic or complicated categories. They are the same assets that preserved wealth through the Weimar hyperinflation, through the collapse of the Soviet Union, through the Asian financial crisis of 1997, and through every other monetary catastrophe in recorded history. But beyond the specific assets, this is about a decision that goes deeper than finance. It is about identity. It is about who you choose to be in a moment of historic transformation. Every generation faces a defining economic event. For your grandparents, it was the Great Depression. For your parents, it may have been the stagflation of the 1970s or the 2008 crash. For you, it is this: the slow-motion collapse of the global reserve currency and the monetary order that has governed the world since 1971. The question is not whether this transition is happening. Gold at $5,000 has settled that question definitively. The question is whether you will be positioned on the right side of it or whether you will be a passive casualty, watching your savings evaporate while the institutions that were supposed to protect you protect themselves instead. The rain has already started to fall and the old shelter is leaking. Every data point we have covered today, the $200 trillion real debt figure, the 1,100 tons of gold bought by central banks in a single year, the $1.2 trillion annual interest payment, the death of the petrodollar, the binary trap facing the Federal Reserve, the $500 billion unrealized loss in the banking system, the $650 trillion derivatives web, every single one of these points converges on the same conclusion. The monetary system as you have known it your entire life is being restructured, and those who understand this are building their arcs, while those who do not are arguing about whether it is even raining. JPMorgan has made their choice. They are projecting $7,300 gold because they see what is coming, and they are positioning accordingly. China has made their choice, stockpiling thousands of tons of gold while quietly reducing their treasury holdings. Russia has made their choice. The central banks of the world have collectively made their choice. The question is whether you will make yours. Will you be the creditor left holding paper promises from an insolvent system? Or will you be the owner who holds what the world actually needs? Will you be the one explaining to your family why you did not act when the signals were everywhere? Or will you be the one who saw the storm, prepared accordingly, and emerged on the other side with your wealth and your freedom intact? The time for complacency is over. The time for hoping things go back to normal is over. Normal is not coming back. $5,000 gold is the new normal, and 7,300 is just the next chapter. I need you to do something right now. Share this video with one person you care about. Just one. A family member, a friend, a colleague, someone whose financial future matters to you. Because the information in this video is not being broadcast on mainstream news. It is not being discussed at dinner tables. And by the time it is, the window will have narrowed significantly. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Turn on notifications. This is not just a content channel. This is a mission. We are building a community of people who refuse to be blindsided, who refuse to be passive victims of a system that is failing by design. Together, we can navigate this and emerge with our wealth and our freedom intact. The storm is no longer on the horizon. It is overhead. And the only question that matters now is what you do next.